What if the parts of yourself that you hide hold the key to your personal power? Welcome to the Magic Mindfulness Podcast. I am Rachel Hupp, and today we are diving into something deliciously appropriate for Halloween, the parts of ourselves that we usually keep hidden in the shadows. And whether you are listening to this on Halloween or if you are discovering it months later, there's something perfect about using this season of longer nights and falling leaves to explore our own hidden depths, right? Because just like nature teaches us that both light and shadow are essential, we are about to discover how those shadowy parts of ourselves might actually be hiding some unexpected treasures. Now, you know that saying, what we resist persists. Well, on this Halloween episode, we are going to explore why those spooky parts of ourselves, our shadows, might actually hold the treats and not the tricks when it comes to finding deeper fulfillment, deeper meaning, deeper ease in our lives. Now, I'm not talking about actual ghosts or goblins. I am talking about those parts of ourselves that we have tucked away in the dark corners of our consciousness. Maybe it's that perfectionism that exhausts us, the inner critic that just won't quiet down, the fear that if we loosen our grip on control, everything might fall apart. Now, as a yoga teacher and a mindfulness coach, I have seen how the shadow side shows up both on and off the mat. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I have lived this out myself, that drive to perfect every pose instead of listening to my body's wisdom, the resistance to taking rest because doing nothing feels uncomfortable. I intimately understand the way that we can twist ourselves into knots trying to do everything right, and we still feel like it's not enough. So, here's what we're going to be exploring in today's episode. We're going to talk about what shadow work actually is and what it's not, why it's not about dwelling in darkness. We're going to talk about some of the hidden costs of keeping parts of ourselves hidden in the shadows. I'll share with you 3 gentle practices for beginning to work with your shadow side. And most importantly, how these darker traits often hold unexpected gifts for our growth and personal transformation. So, my friend, if you're tired of exhausting yourself trying to keep all that dark stuff hidden away, if you're ready to find more ease and self trust, or if you're just curious about what gifts might be waiting for you in those shadowy corners, then this episode is for you. So, let's begin by understanding what I mean when I'm talking about the shadow. You know, as a society, we're kind of obsessed with good vibes only, right? And staying in the light. And I get it. I mean, who wants to look at the messy stuff? It's not pleasant. It can be challenging. It can be a struggle. The parts of ourselves that feel uncomfortable. But here's what I've noticed, both on my own journey and in working with clients. The more that we try to push away those darker traits like our anger, our neediness, our jealousy, or even our ambition, the more power they tend to hold over us, right? It's like, I like to think about it like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, right? The harder you push it down, the more force it takes. And eventually it's going to pop up, and usually at the least convenient moment, right? So let me ask you this. How exhausting is it to keep holding those beach balls underwater? How much of your precious energy is going to maintaining that perfect image, the constant control? And what might become possible for you if you could redirect that energy toward actually living and enjoying your life? So, let me give you an example that I see often with my clients. Picture a woman who prides herself on always being nice and accommodating. She's the one who never says no, who always has it together, who makes sure everyone else's needs are met. Sounds admirable, right? But underneath that perfect exterior, there's resentment building up. She is exhausted. She might find herself snapping at her family or loved ones over tiny things. She might be experiencing mysterious health issues or finding herself lying awake at night, grinding her teeth, unable to get to sleep. The darker emotions that she's not allowing herself to acknowledge, they're showing up anyway, just in ways that are harder to recognize and harder to address. Or maybe you're someone who's built your life around being in control. Everything has to be done just right, every detail managed, every outcome predicted. I see you and I understand why. That control probably served you really well at some point in your life. It might have helped you to achieve some really amazing things. But what's the cost? How much energy does it take to maintain that level of perfectionism? What opportunities for joy and genuine connection might you be missing because you are so focused on doing everything right? And so, this is why shadow work isn't just some optional advanced spiritual practice. It's actually really important for our overall well being. All of us have the light and the dark, the yin and the yang. And so, shadow work is so important for our overall well being because when we reject parts of ourselves, even the parts that we think are bad or negative or we don't want to face, we are essentially operating as a partial person, right? We're using so much energy keeping those beach balls underwater that we don't have enough energy left for actually living and enjoying our lives. So, before we talk about how to start working with our shadow side, let's clear up some common misconceptions about what shadow work actually is. So, what do you think shadow work is? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And first of all, I want to tell you what it's not, because there are some really big misconceptions out there. Now, first of all, shadow work is not about dwelling on negativity. It's not about unearthing these terrible secrets about yourself. It's not about finding out that you're a bad person or diving into trauma without support. And this is really important. It's not about getting rid of your shadow side. Now, the term shadow work, it actually comes from Carl Jung, who recognized that we all have parts of ourselves that we have pushed into the shadows because somewhere along the way, we learned these parts were not acceptable, right? So maybe you learned that it wasn't okay to be angry, or that being sensitive was weakness, or that needing help meant that you were failing. These are all aspects of ourselves that we might try to hide, cover up, push away, so we don't have to face them, so that they don't show up. So you might think of it like this. Imagine that you were born with a full spectrum of colors, all of your natural traits, all of your emotions, all of your energies. But as you grew up, as you developed, as you got older, you learned that some of those colors just weren't acceptable. Maybe red, anger, wasn't allowed in your house. Or maybe purple, creativity was dismissed as impractical. And so you began to push those colors into the shadow, showing only the ones that you learned were good, right? But here's the thing, the colors, all those colors are still part of your rainbow. They're still part of who you are. And so trying to live without them is trying to paint a masterpiece with only a portion of your color palette, right? And so I think this is where one of the most beautiful principles from yoga philosophy comes in, and it's this concept of purna, or wholeness. So in yoga, we understand that true peace doesn't come from rejecting parts of ourselves, but from integrating all aspects of who we are into a complete whole. Shadow work is simply the practice of gently bringing awareness to these dismissed parts of ourselves, not to judge them, not to get rid of them, but to understand what gifts they may be holding for us. And so, just to sidetrack a little bit, I was working with an energetic alignment coach for several months this year, probably close to a year. And she's big into human design and the gene keys. And so, every one of the gene keys has a shadow and a gift. And, we can learn from both sides of this, right? We can learn from the shadow side, we can learn from the gift. And so, with shadow work, we are practicing guiding our awareness to these parts of ourselves that we've hidden, we've dismissed, we've pushed them off into the shadows so we can understand what gifts, what treasures they might be holding for us. So, for example, that perfectionism that drives you crazy, it might actually be carrying your deep commitment to excellence. The anger that you are afraid to acknowledge, maybe it's protecting your healthy boundaries. The neediness that you are ashamed of, what if it's pointing you towards your genuine need for deeper connections? Now, the goal here, my friend, is not to fix these traits. The goal is just to simply bring an awareness and an understanding to them to learn what they are trying to tell us and integrate them in a way that serves rather than hinders our growth. And here's what I think is really fascinating. So often, our greatest gifts lie in the very traits that we have pushed down into the shadows. When we can bring them into the light with awareness, with compassion, they can actually transform from obstacles into allies on our path towards personal transformation, towards fulfillment, towards satisfaction. Now, I do want to acknowledge that if you are feeling a little bit nervous about all of this, that is completely normal. In fact, it is a sign of your body's wisdom, right? Your nervous system is designed to protect you and it is doing its job. That's why I'm going to introduce you to 3 gentle practices that honor that protective instinct while creating just enough space for exploration. And again, if you are working with a counselor or a coach or a therapist, feel free to run these techniques by them before you try them out on your own. Make sure that you feel comfortable and safe. Never do anything that doesn't feel right for you on your path. All right. So I'm going to share 3 gentle ways that you might choose to begin exploring your shadow side. And I do want to point out that I said gentle. It's not about diving into the deep end. We are waiting in mindfully with lots of self-compassion along the way. And so the first approach that I want to share with you today is called, I like to call it the mirror method. And so, you know how sometimes certain people really trigger us, right? Maybe there's that one person at work who just gets under your skin, or that social media post that made you unexpectedly angry. These triggers are often mirrors because they reflect back to us the parts of ourselves that we have pushed into the shadows. And here's what I find fascinating. A lot of times, these qualities that trigger us the most strongly in other people, they're actually qualities that we ourselves have been working on. So, that person at work whose ambition bothers you, maybe you have learned to temper your own healthy ambitions so much that seeing it expressed freely in someone else feels threatening to you, right? And so, here's a simple practice: bring some self awareness into it, bring some, get into the habit of noticing. Next time you have a strong reaction to someone or something, pause and ask yourself with curiosity, what quality in them or what quality in that am I judging? What quality am I judging? And where might I be denying or repressing that same quality within myself? And remember, this is not about blame. It's not about judgment. It's simply about awareness. So, the mirror method. Now, the second approach is sacred journaling. And now, before you think, oh, great, another journaling practice, hear me out. This is not about writing pages and pages. It's about creating a safe space to explore what Carl Jung called making the darkness conscious. So maybe you'll try this. Just set a timer for 5 minutes and write about one thing that you think you should never be. Maybe it's angry or selfish or lazy, whatever comes up for you. What is one thing that you think you should never be? And then ask yourself, what if this trait was actually trying to protect me or teach me something? What wisdom might it hold? And you might be surprised by what comes up for you. And be sure to check the show notes because I will have a PDF sacred journaling guide for you to help you begin to gently explore your shadow side. So you can find that down in the show notes if you are interested in going a little deeper with this journaling practice. But the third approach that I want to talk about is meditating with the shadow. So in yoga philosophy, we talk about witnessing consciousness or sakshi bhava, the ability to observe ourselves without judgment. So we can use the same exact principle with our shadow work. So here's a simple practice. When you are in a place and time where you want to work on this, find a comfortable seat. You might even light a candle. You can soften down or close your eyes and imagine a part of yourself that you normally would try to hide or change. And instead of trying to fix it or deny it, just allow yourself to sit with it like you would sit with a friend who was going through some troubled times, right? Sit with yourself like you would sit with a friend. And just notice what sensations arise in your body. Notice what this part of you might be trying to tell you. Now, an important note, you will know you're ready for shadow work when you have a foundation of self love and self compassion in place. So, if you are in a particularly vulnerable time right now, or if exploring these areas, even these concepts, brings up intense emotions, please be gentle with yourself. You might consider working with a qualified therapist or a coach. Do this in a way that feels right for you and make sure that you get the support that you need along your journey. Now, one thing that I have noticed in my years of guiding women through this work is that the shadows that we are most afraid to face often hold exactly the medicine that we need. The power we're afraid to claim, the boundaries we're afraid to set, the joy that we are afraid to fully express, they are all waiting for us in those shadowy corners, ready for us to reclaim them when we are ready. There's no timeline when we're ready. Remember, the goal is never to eliminate our shadow. It's to build a relationship with it, to understand it better, because so often what we find in the shadows is not nearly as frightening as we imagined, right? In fact, some of our most powerful gifts are waiting there, ready and waiting for us to reclaim them. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to just quickly review what we have explored today because we've talked about quite a bit. We talked about how shadow work isn't about dwelling in darkness, right? It's not about focusing on the negative. It's about reclaiming and honoring the parts of ourselves that we've hidden away. Remember that beautiful metaphor of the rainbow, right? We are all born with a full spectrum of colors, and our true wholeness comes from embracing all of them, even the ones that we have hidden away over the years. We explored how pushing away our darker traits like anger, neediness, or the urge to control actually gives them more power over us because what we resist persists. It's like that beach ball underwater. The harder we push it down, the more force it takes to keep it there, and it's exhausting. And we talked about three gentle ways to begin this work: the mirror method, using our triggers as windows or mirrors into our own shadow; sacred journaling, exploring our should nevers with curiosity, with mindful awareness. And again, you can go to the show notes to download your copy of a sacred journal. And then finally, meditating with your shadows, sitting with these parts of yourself like you would sit with a trusted friend. Now, most importantly, we've talked about how our shadow traits often hold unexpected gifts or treasures. That perfectionism might be carrying your commitment to excellence. Your anger might be protecting your boundaries. Your neediness might be pointing you towards a true need for deeper connections. So here we are. If you are listening to this real time, it is Halloween, a time when we traditionally face our fears. We play with the darker side of life. And isn't it interesting that this holiday falls during autumn, during fall, when nature herself is teaching us about the beauty of letting things fall away, of honoring both light and shadow, of inviting more darkness in to balance out that light energy, right? The balance of light and dark. You know, one of my favorite teachings from yoga philosophy is that we are already whole. We touched on this a little bit. All of us, we are already whole. Even the parts that we think are too messy or too dark or too much, they are all a part of what makes us beautifully unique in our own magical way, right? So they're all a part of our wholeness. Sometimes we just need to shift our perspective so we can see how. Now, just like the moon, we don't have to be full and bright all the time to be complete, right? The dark phases are just as important to our cycle as the full moon's glow. Our shadows, likewise, are not our enemies. They can be the missing pieces of our authenticity, the missing pieces to our fulfillment, the missing pieces to our sense of satisfaction and wholeness that are just waiting to be reclaimed. So I invite you to use this time as a doorway into your own shadow work journey. Start small, maybe try one of the practices we talked about today, and remember to approach this practice with curiosity, not with judgment, right? And always, always lead with self compassion. Now, if you would like support on this journey, I do have a few resources for you. So I would love to guide you. You can join us over in the Zen Space, my online yoga membership, where we set monthly intentions and explore this practice of wholeness. Or if you are feeling called to deeper work, I do have a few spots open for one on one coaching where we can navigate your shadow work journey together with personalized guidance and support. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it. Send me a DM on Instagram at I am Rachel Hupp and let me know what insights came up for you. I personally read every message and I love hearing how these concepts land for you. Finally, if you would like a simple guide to getting started with shadow work, I have created a sacred journal PDF that you can download right here in the show notes or by visiting rachelhupp.com/episode 36. Remember, the goal isn't to banish our shadows, it's to embrace them as part of our wholeness. Because when we can hold space for all parts of ourselves with compassion, that's when true transformation begins. All right. I would love to hear your key takeaway from this episode. Feel free to post it in the comments, or again, you can DM me over on Instagram at I am Rachel Hupp. And thank you so much for joining me for this special Halloween episode. Until next time, keep embracing all the parts of your journey, both the light and the shadow.